enjoys going out under the stars. So, first night with a telescope. I really remember my first night with a telescope. Shane, I'm not sure about you. What was your first telescope, and do you want to tell us a little about that first night?
Yeah, so the first telescope, and I'll say maybe I'll qualify this with kind of proper telescope because my first telescope was a very terrible department store telescope that just didn't work, and I think I made all of the mistakes with that telescope, including my first night out, that I think helped me learn for the future. But basically, that first telescope, I went or I purchased it from, again, just a department store. I can't even remember what the brand was or anything, but it was like a 3-inch reflector, on a terrible tripod with a terrible mount with terrible eyepieces. Everything was bad. And I knew enough at that point. Like, I never really read a book on how to do astronomy or anything like that. I knew that dark skies were important. So the first time I used it, I threw it in my vehicle and drove outside of the city, which was maybe 5 to 10 minutes. I really wasn't dark, but I thought that was good enough. Set up on the side of the road, and there was a full moon that night.
Uh-huh.
So, knowing what I know now, I probably would not have left the city on a full moon night. Um, but this telescope, I thought I'll just look at the moon. That'll be easy. It's big. I
Mm.
can see it. And I learned that night that even finding the moon was sort of difficult. And in hindsight now, I know it was because like there wasn't really a finder on that telescope,
Mm.
and it that can actually be a little challenging. Try that next time, even with your good
Mm.
telescopes. Just try
Mm.
finding the moon without a finder, just
Mm.
lining it up. You'll get it, but it takes a few tries. And because this was like a 3-inch reflector, I don't know what my field of view was. Probably like 20 degrees or something with the crappy eyepieces that came with it. So anyway, fast forward to when I bought my first real telescope, which was an 8-inch Skywatcher Dobsonian. My first night out was on the patio of our apartment at the time, and I looked at the moon and Jupiter. It was, both were bright, both were easy to see. I had a finder scope, like a 9 by 50 straight through finder on that thing, and I was able to locate the objects pretty quickly. And I was blown away by the detail on the moon and very disappointed with what I saw with Jupiter. Just because I think seeing wasn't that great last night, but I was kind of expecting, as good as the moon was, it was kind of photographic. I was expecting photographic views of Jupiter. And of course, we know that that's usually not the case unless you have a wonderful night of seeing, which that wasn't. But that was kind of it. It was a pretty basic, simple night in the summertime. And at that point in my observing life, I didn't even think I'd ever care about looking at galaxies or nebula. I was quite content to look at solar system stuff.
Mm.
How about you? What was your first experience like?
Well, it's funny, like I sort of had it in mind what I'd say, and then I had listened to you talk, and I was like, oh, like just contextualizing it. So the first time I went out of the city to go observing, I didn't even have a telescope. I'd never even looked through a telescope before, not really. Um, and I got binoculars, and my friends and I went outside of the city with the binoculars and kind of traded views back and forth. So kind of a little bit more of limited optics, but we're able to stretch our legs quite a bit just with those, and I couldn't afford a telescope for a couple of years. So I only ever just had binoculars for quite a long time. So it's kind of interesting to sort of think about going out of the city for the first time. It sounds like the first time you went out, you had a little telescope, and the first time I went out, I couldn't afford even the little telescope. I just had to take binoculars and a friend with me who knew a little bit more about astronomy than I did.
Right on.
Yeah, huh. So, but I did get a telescope eventually, and I just wanted to say, I guess, like in a way, at least my part of this is inspired by one of our listeners, Richard N. from Oakland, down in San Francisco area. Anyway, Richard writes, "Hi Chris, I was listening to some of your back episodes in the archives on reflectors and heard with amusement that your first 8-inch was perhaps a Starhopper by Celestron, and he writes, this is just an email he sent a couple weeks ago. I was given one last week. I was told it needed some TLC. It was actually in decent shape. I got the spider webs out of the tube and put some black felt inside. And yeah, did some spray painting around it to kind of spruce it up a little, made a spacer to keep the scope from moving back and forth. Have it in fresh collimation, and moves like butter, but unfortunately appears to be slightly astigmatic.
Mm,
We have Telescope Makers Workshop that meets every Friday at the Chabot Space and Science Center. And I'll take the mirror up there to be tested. Hopefully, I've not done something weird in the setup. I've read that Starhopper said good conical mirrors. Hope you and Shane are doing well. Richard from Oakland. Yeah, that was my first telescope, and this telescope that he sent photos of, I put in the notes here, Shane, is in far better shape than my telescope was when I last saw it, which sadly is long since in a dumpster because in the maritime climate where I was using it, particle board does not last very long in the exterior environment, to say the
mm,
least.
hmm.
Um, but there were some things that I liked about this telescope, but in general, my Celestron Starhopper was a dismal failure. And in part, it was not a problem with Celestron so much as the company I bought it from, which is long since gone out of business, probably for reasons like this, is that you could pay a premium of like quite a bit of money, $50 or something, back in, 1990 something dollars, and they supposedly would go through the instrument because you're buying a telescope and having it shipped, and as a newcomer, like I wouldn't really know what to look for. So I think I had paid this, and the telescope arrived, and I set it up, and I knew that you had to align the mirrors, and I had a lot of trouble doing that, which isn't unusual from what I'd
Hmm.
heard. And this is in the early days of the internet, so I knew this could be a problem or a challenge. And anyhow, so I got it lined up as best I could, which really wasn't very good at all. And I was able to see Mars, and it was in March of, oh, I want to say, well, late 90s anyway, mid 90s anyway. And I could see Mars cutting in between the clouds as they were whipping by. It was like this cold, sort of windy March evening, and was able to get it on Mars and actually see like the polar caps. Like the first thing I ever looked at through my own telescope was one of the polar caps of Mars. So that was kind of
Oh,
cool.
wow. That's a great observation to start with.
Yeah. Yeah. So just in my driveway, I remember I had the lights on and everything because I was so new to using a telescope, and it kind of goes to show what we know and don't know is just in trying to use the instrument, I need quite a bit of light. Like I had the porch light on just to see, okay, like you grab it here to move it, and this is how it works. Like in the dark, yeah, that's tough to do. So actually, having the back light on was quite helpful for me in learning to use this behemoth of an instrument. But there were a few things wrong with this telescope, and I was a little bit disappointed in the views, and this is why. It had nothing to do with me. The secondary had arrived with a lot of faults. The secondary, it had a singular stock. The telescope was, these are strange telescopes in a way, because in some respects, they skimped on some things for like lightweight purposes, and they had the stuff in the advertisement that these, oh, it's got a single stock secondary, it's lighter weight, it's got, such and such a mirror, a conical mirror for lighter weight. What they didn't tell you is they had to put the conical mirror in this big steel cell in order to keep it in balance, and it was just like a bit of a Rube Goldberg, or however you say it, type of type of instrument. Anyway, and one of the things they did, which was this is really weird. Typically, the mirror box is square, I'm sure yours was
Hmm.
square. These ones were not square. At least mine was angled in. I mean, it was just like a strange design. And it had these wood screws or actually they weren't wood screws. Sorry. I'm giving it qualities it didn't have. It had like gyprock screws screwing the particle board together, and right away you can see like there's like this Starhopper sticker logo that's on it. Well, mine lasted all of about 3 nights before it just bubbled and was tearing off. It rub against it and kind of all tore apart, and then I could never quite get all the adhesive off of it. It just was terrible.
Hmm.
Um, but it had these neat trunnions to adjust the telescope for balance. So these telescopes were super easy to balance, and that was a great feature of them. Hmm.
Yeah, yeah. I remember that too with the Skywatcher that it was pretty easy to balance just with tensioning up the
Yeah.
kind of at the mount where the big bearings meet the mount. You could just tighten that and worked quite well.
Yeah, well, those Skywatcher ones that came out even just a few years or a couple years later were a friend of mine bought an 8-inch, and I couldn't believe it because my telescope was more like a 10-inch instrument in size, and his seemed more like what I would have thought what a 6-inch would be. And that tensioning mechanism they had, well, somewhat unconventional, and the things stuck out a little bit. It worked really quite well. I think it was a great design as
Hmm.
well. It would have been nice to have seen these kind of trunnions carry on. I imagine they were pretty expensive to make those, a lot of steel and metal involved in them, but they did work okay. But it turned out that what had happened with my secondary was that they had like overpainted it or something, and I don't know if it was that the mirror wasn't fully coated for the secondary or that they had gotten paint on it, but it was like you couldn't really adjust the secondary. And I was trying, had like these nylon screws. And eventually I played around with it enough. There was a big snap, and it was simply like the paint breaking away. And then I had like this paint dust land all over the mirror. And then I could get it about 90% in optical alignment, but it was impossible to get it in 100% alignment because um, just the faults in the design of the secondary holder, and the mirror was of such compromised quality. Like you could never get a very good view out of it. You would get all these weird spikes and artifacts and that. But I did use the heck out of it and saw, I don't know, probably 1,000 objects through it, and certainly probably in more detail than what Galileo's instrument saw. But it was a little bit disappointing. And when I used the telescope until basically the sonotube unraveled.
Mm.
Yeah, but when I finally joined an astronomy club and looked through a proper 8-inch, I was like really quite blown away because a quality 8-inch certainly is quite a great instrument on the night sky. But yeah, that was kind of my first night out with an instrument, but and I certainly found it to be a bit of a challenge. Um, but what should people try to work with or expect when they're starting out with a new scope?
Yeah, well, I think like if you're kind of going down this path, you have your telescope and you're anxiously awaiting your first night. I think it really helps to start planning your session. Like again, I'm kind of going back to when I did it. I didn't really pre-plan much, but like observing should start well before the night you're actually collecting photons. And I think it helps to prepare yourself a little bit to know what you're wanting to look at, and either have a list of objects, or if you're like me and you want to make the moon your first object, which I highly recommend because it is easy to find if you have a proper finder, and there's so much detail to see there. Maybe have a moon map that you've purchased, and you're ready to go, and maybe a red light, or if you're doing the moon, I guess you don't even really need a red light, although any good astronomer should have that.
Hmm.
And kind of just get familiar with your gear, like you mentioned it, Chris. your first night out, you had the yard light on so that you could just see kind of how to operate the thing.
Hmm.
And, one thing I remember doing was, I put it together in my living room, put the finder on, put the eyepieces in, all of that stuff just to feel the motion and how the thing worked. So I think doing all of that in advance of your first night of observing is a really good thing. It'll make your first night out a lot more enjoyable and help you with a little more success.
Hmm.
And then sort of part and parcel to that is you start to become a little bit of an amateur weather forecaster, or at least
Yeah.
appreciator of the weather. So the other thing is to start looking for your first opportunity to actually use your gear, which would be a clear night that probably is not too windy and is probably not too cold.
Mm.
I think are some key factors to look for too for that first night under the stars.
Yeah, well, I think I failed in all of the above because it was cold, it was windy, and it was cloudy.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, I kind of persevered. But I actually think what I did was a good thing, which is
Hmm.
to set up at home and to kind of get myself oriented.
Yes.
Instead of trying to head out somewhere dark, I think staying close, and then I could kind of go in and out and kind of, oh, I need this or I need that. And even though, well, the way I had it set up then wasn't like ideal, it was super, super handy. Not the like my backyard that I grew up in, so to speak, even though it was in a little town, it was pretty dark. Like you could see the helix with your binoculars.
Oh, wow.
So that's a pretty good dark spot. You see the Milky Way overhead, um, but kind of ran out. But I bet you that my backyard site was not as good as my current cabin observatory site, at least when that light's not on. But it was close,
Hmm.
which is kind of surprising. But yeah, that first night out, I think it's smart to try to stay local and not to
Yep.
go too far afield. And I have learned that with other instruments as well. Pretty much, and this is kind of an interesting topic because whether it's your first night out with a first scope or your first night out with your 15th scope or whatever I'm at. I don't think I've had 15 scopes, but I've probably had half a dozen or more. But I always find that first night a little bit challenging and a little bit frustrating. And I think that's just something to keep in mind. I don't think that is an unusual emotion to have, that feelings of frustration and learning in ways that you perhaps weren't expecting. And I think because of that, I think sometimes people do get deterred from doing this when it's their first time. I always know those first that in particular that first night is going to be pretty rocky, the first few nights, and depending on how complicated the gear that you get is, it can be pretty frustrating to get going.
Yeah, totally agree. And that's the next thing that I wrote down here on my list was make that first session at home,
Mm,
as you stated, Chris, because as soon as you go mobile, you do add a layer of complexity to the whole thing. Because you have to pack everything up, and sometimes, if you're like me, when I first started, you don't know what you don't know. And you start observing and you realize that you're thirsty and you want a glass of water or
yeah,
something. So, if you're at home, all of that stuff is so much
yeah,
easier. And, as part of that learning process to kind of figure out your own routine and how you like to observe. And kind of in conjunction with that, I also wrote down to set up a couple of hours before sunset
mm,
to give yourself some of that light because you're going to need it just to get the telescope, put together, whether it's a mount and tripod or if it's a Dobsonian, get the finders on, all of that sort of stuff. It's so much easier when it is daylight as opposed to trying to use like a headlamp or something like that at night.
hmm.
And even now, even though I'm super experienced, I like to set up when it's twilight or earlier, just so I have a little more light to operate because it's just a lot easier.
I even do that in the observatory, even
Yeah.
though I mean, I can shut the door and I can turn on, as few or as many red lights as I can gather. But it's easier just to, oh, this fiddly little thing, or you put something down, you don't know where you put it. It's just way better to do that while there's still a good amount of light. So once kind of the sun is below the wall of my observatory, that's when I go and get it running. And then I go back in, and then you're not like out and like trying to set up and then observe it. It seems like it's a much more pleasant experience to go and get things ready and then to go out and actually start your observing session as like a separate event, so to speak.
Totally. And then, another benefit is hopefully your telescope will acclimatize too, because it needs some time, especially like some of these bigger Dobbs, for that mirror to cool, as the temperatures settle a bit around twilight. So catch two birds with one stone there. We've talked about this one too, Chris, but just make sure you dress for the temperature. Again, another good reason to make that first session or maybe sessions at home, because sometimes it's hard to know how thick of a jacket or if you need gloves or something else just to be comfortable at the eyepiece. So if you're at home, you can just run inside, grab another jacket or another layer and, maintain your comfort level.
Yeah,
Um,
makes lots of sense.
yeah, yeah, and I think making that first object somewhat easy to find is important. And for me, easy to find objects are ones that I can see with my naked eye. It's a little easier to point the telescope there, or at least, starting with some bright stars. Like if you're star hopping to some kind of DSO, starting with a bright, easy to find star is a certain, or it increases your percentages of success.
Mm,
And, once you get to that object too, this was something I didn't really do that much of early on and sort of learned to do more of this as I became more experienced. But when you find an object, spend some time there and try different eyepieces, different magnifications, maybe even different fields of view. But also, if you have filters, try that too. Because all of these factors, sort of are personal preference. So you'll discover what you like and don't like, but can really change the appearance of some of these objects. And some of these changes are for the better, but some of them actually make it look worse.
hmm
So I think there's a lot of value in doing that. And, I think it also helps you appreciate some of the objects a little bit more.
hmm No, no, fair enough. It is a challenge to get going, and I think it's one of those things where the technology can really become one of the most challenging things, like in all of my years. And the most challenging thing I ever encountered to get started for a first scope was my electronic mount. And now that I've got it down, like it's really good, but it still does take a little bit to kind of get it up and running and pointing the way that I and the accuracy that I needed to point at, more than I thought it would be. And that's me with lots of experience. And I know that lots of newcomers coming to it are not coming with that experience. They're not sure. They're thinking they're going to flip a switch. It's going to come on and do everything they need to do. And perhaps telescopes will get to that point, but I don't think they're quite there yet. And certainly in helping people out, that's one of the things. I remember this couple brought a little 5 or 6 inch Cassegrain, beautiful little Celestron, down to the grasslands with us, and I forget they didn't bring the manual with them or something, and there was something we needed, a piece of information from the manual to do the first setup or something, and we had no Wi-Fi or internet there at the time, and we just couldn't get it running, just
Mhm.
and then it was like one of those things, or maybe it was that they had just put a couple D cell batteries into the mount base, and they just ran out like immediately, things of that nature, and they didn't. Maybe it was that they didn't bring the just the regular AC power connector. But yeah, it's all those kind of things. That's why with first scopes, I really try to encourage people to get something that is just a manual telescope that you can have really quick early success with. Like you said, Shane, you want it to go out and point at the moon, and that can be difficult enough, but you eventually got it, and that success can spur you on to keep going. And you want another telescope later on, go for it. But I think it's important to have those early successes. Like you said, pick some easy objects on a good night when things are visible and it's not too inclement as far as the weather goes, and get out there and make some enjoyable memories. Otherwise, I think it can be a bit rough on people to keep going.
Yeah, yeah, great points. Um, uh, you can easily become frustrated too, and have it be a poor experience. And
Mm.
if you're excited, just know that that can happen. And again, try to set yourself up for as much success as possible. But no, there might be a few frustrating moments that come along the way too, and it's just part of the learning experience.
Hmm.
The last thing that I had on my list here, though, Chris, was once you've got all this down and you're actually observing, don't forget to record your observing some way, somehow. I think it's important. And, there's a number of different ways to do it. You can just simply write notes. Our good observing friend Alistair, he likes to do voice recordings and then transpose those digitally the next day. Uh, we've talked lots about sketching, lots of great ways to record your observations. And why I also think it's important, especially at the start, is it does a few things that maybe are kind of not well understood or maybe unintended, but I think it helps you become a better observer when you have to think about describing the object or when you have to draw the object and sketch it. I think you start to see more detail in the observations that you're making. And also, like when you're starting, kind of beyond the observation, you can also write down or record other notes about the session. For example, like my hands are cold, bring gloves next time, or
Mm.
something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah, that's important.
To,
Yeah.
to capture your lessons learned, because throughout the course of the night, when you get tired and you start looking at lots of different objects, you might forget some of these other details. And having a way to record all of that will just make you a better observer in the long run.
Yeah, I was way too long in the tooth before I started bringing a water bottle with me, which seems kind of ridiculous. But it was like some years or like, and then I was, after a while and after observing with other people who were better at preparing, I was like, all right, you need to take a granola bar or something, you need to take some water, you need to take, and I remember reading, I think it was Terrence Dickinson or in Sky News or something, or maybe it was in one of the earlier editions of the Backyard Astronomer's Guide, Alan Dyer, one of them writing about like, oh, like these are the things we take, like some extra water, some extra food, some, Advil or Tylenol or whatever, and things of that nature. And I've had that. I've actually I remember reading it, not take any action, think simply reading it for entertainment purposes, and then going out and having a headache one night and having, to go back and literally like driving all the way back to the city. The night is done. I'm not going back out, taking some Tylenol, and then within 30 minutes feeling well enough to like, go do something else with some other friends in the city because, well, now I'm bored and I sort of had planned to be out on this Friday or Saturday night or something. But I kind of lost that night doing astronomy for the simple fact of not having some very mild headache medication and just a headache bad enough that it was difficult to look through an instrument.
Yeah, yeah, another great point. And especially if you're driving, if you are going to go down that path, you do want to cover a few more bases of potential things that you could encounter, like a spare set of batteries. I remember one night I went out and I think I was using one of those Skywatcher red lights with the rotary dial on it, powered by a 9-volt battery. And I got to, the dark sky and set up. And maybe a couple minutes into my session,
Mm,
my red light died and I didn't have
yeah,
a backup battery. And I realized at that moment how important that red light was in
yeah,
order to see not just my star charts, but my lists of what I wanted to
yeah,
even look at.
yeah,
So it turned into a night of just, okay, well, I guess I have to only look at objects that I remember where they are, which was fine, but it totally changed my plan. And it was like, okay, next time, obviously I'm going to replace this battery, but I think I'm going to carry a spare with me too, because I don't want to, jeopardize another night of observing like that.
yeah. I have scads of red lights now. I was always pretty bad for having a light, losing it, And I would take like one light out with me. Like, no, like in the past, like especially having the observatory, like I have probably half a dozen or more red lights, plus red lights in the observatory. There's only red lights in the observatory. But yeah, definitely something to keep in mind. But yeah, that first night out, keep it simple. Do it somewhere that you're comfortable, and then be safe, and just have the manual with you as well, and go out with a little bit of a plan. I think that's the basics of it, Shane.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, it's not super daunting, but just a little bit of preparation will really, I think, increase your enjoyment, but also just the kind of success you have finding objects and observing.
Great. All right, we have a couple emails here to read. This is something that's kind of popped up, Shane. You may have picked up on it even the last time we did our October observers calendar. Went to see in the night sky for October, and that is with the carbon stars, and my phrasing of are at their best or whatever, and uh, and something that I think we talked about briefly, and then Clint wrote in sort of crystallizing that. Do you want to just read Clint's email, and then I'll read the reply?
Yeah, so you said I was listening to the latest podcast detailing the calendar for October. You mentioned several carbon stars and indicated the dates they would be best. I assume that the dates mentioned and referenced from the calendar are for when the variable is at maximum. Is it best to observe carbon stars when they are at maximum? I'd always thought that the deeper reds would be more obvious if the star was not fully ablaze. I was also under the impression that they would pop more if there was a little more moonlight or light pollution in the sky. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, thanks for that, Clint. And this already has gone back to Clint. So it's something that had occurred to me as well, Shane, is that we have this list of carbon stars. Actually, I think Rick Kuziak, who I mentioned in the previous podcast on the light pollution, is a bit of a carbon star aficionado simply because he made some corrections, and they're a variable star as well, and he's a variable star expert writ large. And Marie Noonan had taken that list, and she works with me on the Observer's calendar, and she had picked some. I don't know if they're all from that list or some of her favorites, and had written that up in this way. And so I was like, well, yeah, I was kind of thinking that too. Yeah, that's a good question, Clint, and I almost feel like somebody else had written this in too. We might have had two or three of these over the course of the past little while. So Marie wrote back and said, "Hi, Chris. Yes, the dates given are when the variable carbon stars are at their max, as per AAVSO ephemerides. One observer in Cloudy Nights has stated that carbon stars are at their ruddiest when they are at their minimum. John Barentine also states this. Since I do not have B and V values for these stars at brightest and at minima, I cannot confirm this. I note that the V values give the Simbad and AAVSO are not necessarily the same for these stars. Also, if they are quite faint at minimum, they may be hard to detect in some of the smaller scopes. Color is something which probably varies with the observer. Ellen is another observer from Kitchener-Waterloo who Marie observes with. She says, Ellen and I observed some carbon stars at Bayfield, including VX Andromedae, which has a color index of positive 5.59. It didn't seem to be as darkly red as I expected, and I think Ellen felt the same about the other stars we observed. We thought it might have something to do with the sky conditions, no moon, but very windy. I also tried to observe R Fornax for the pleasure of observing something in Fornax, but was unable to pick it out from the field. It was near max and has a color index of positive 2.2. Perhaps I do not have good color sensitivity. Maybe next time we could make it clear that the dates given are for when the stars are at their brightest. Meanwhile, I recall a very good article in Astronomy or Sky and Telescope about carbon stars some time ago. I will try to go through my older magazines, see if I can find it. Hope this helps, Marie. And then there was some further back and forth as well, but I think that captures the gist of it. And the thing that I started thinking about after reading Clint's email and then Marie's reply is that Well, let's say we have a star that at minimum is magnitude 15, okay, and I don't know that I can see a 15th magnitude star through my 7 inch. I don't think I have. Maybe I can. I don't know, but that's a pretty faint star, Shane.
Yeah. Oh, sure. That's extremely faint.
Yeah, and so let's say that star brightens up to ninth magnitude. Okay, well now I can see that star.
Hmm.
I've seen tons and tons of ninth magnitude stars through all kinds of instruments. Well, now I can see there, oh, that star is red. Now, here's what I don't know, and I think this is kind of where some of the meanderings in our email went, was that, well, let's say then you have the a star, a different star that is a carbon star that starts at ninth magnitude, and maybe it brightens to fourth magnitude. Okay. And so, well, who's to say which star is going to have better red properties when visually observed? Is that star that brightens up to ninth magnitude going to be appear more red and easily detectable than it did at 15th? Well, I'm going to say, well, maybe yes. I don't know. I haven't run this, but I think that's probably a fair assessment. I can't see, or maybe if I did, could hardly see a 15th magnitude star, whereas a ninth magnitude star is easy, and definitely if a ninth magnitude star was red, I would see it. Now, with the ninth magnitude star that brightens to fourth magnitude, maybe it's just so bright it's going to appear more orange than red, right?
Hmm.
So maybe an argument holds water that in that case, a star that is brightening is going to appear less red than it does at its minimum brightness.
Very interesting. I've just I've really never observed a lot of carbon stars, so it's kind of a new world for me actually, and this is very insightful.
Are you on a low carbon star diet?
Maybe. Apparently I have been, yeah.
I I am very sensitive to certain spectra, it turns out. And I have not gone out to observe very many carbon stars. I have observed very, very many carbon stars simply because as I am observing and as a wide field observer, one of the advantages to that is I've observed a lot of the night sky, and I probably have observed, oh, definitely more than 100 carbon stars. Um, and I've looked up the ones that are particularly good, and they're always on those lists. So yeah, to say that I've observed the best 30 brightest carbon stars for sure 100%, and certainly probably close to at least another 100, maybe even more than that, simply in my just in the realm of my observing by accidentally just coming across them at different magnitudes and different points in their brightness and fadiness and that sort of thing. But there are lots around. And I think depending on the individual, I think some people are more sensitive to those things than others.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Color is definitely a very individualistic thing, as to what we see through the eyepiece.
Yeah, I always think about that. I don't, do you remember that? It was like a blue dress thing. Maybe it was like 10 years ago or close to it, where there was like this photo of this woman in a blue dress, and some people saw it as blue, and some people saw it as white, and I think whatever it was something like, well, most people saw it as blue, and then some people saw it as white, sort of like two-thirds, if I'm getting this right. And I remember seeing this, and or it was gold. I think you would see it as a gold-ish dress instead of blue, and people, you know, and so I saw this, and I was like, oh, this is pretty hokey, and I saw it as a white dress, and so I took it to the astronomy class I was teaching at the time at the Lifelong Learning Center, and I put it up on the screen, and I think pretty much most people saw it as a hue of blue. There was somebody who saw kind of they saw like a shimmer of gold, but I mean, I did not see any blue in this dress at all. I got all the gold. It was a white dress with gold, and that was it to me. There was no blue hardly at all in the dress, maybe like a few little a few little accents or something. And I was so blown away by the fact um, that this class of like 40 people, like very few of them saw any of the white at all, or gold, and that I was in this small little group of people that saw this like that. So that was really kind of eye-opening to me.
Hmm. Yeah, pretty interesting.
Yeah, there's some other weird things too. Like I remember observing the sun during the transit of Venus, and I was like, huh, that kind of looks like a solar flare. And I was just observing it in white light, and I went over to one of the H alpha scopes, and it was. I was like, I didn't think you could see a solar flare in white light. So yeah, I think we're all slightly different, sensitive. And then the odd time, like I'll be observing with Mike, and he's like, "Oh, look at this." I'm like, "I don't see anything. What's going on?"
Mm-hmm.
So that's the nature of it. But I noticed that things that are red, like the Orion Nebula, to me, I like, and I was looking at it last weekend. I always see color in it. Like, to me, it has a palette of color. And I was always reluctant to say that for the longest time. But even as I've aged, I went back to it on purpose to say, well, I still won't see color in it, but every year it's like, yeah, I see color, like quite a bit of color. I only see color in the Orion Nebula. So it's sort of a strange experience for me, particularly with filters. The UHC in particular, I see it all the greens, and then if I'm not using a filter, I get some of the maroons. So that definitely is a strange thing when you start amateur astronomy and you start looking at this stuff. And I'd done it quite a bit before I started looking, and then and observing with other people, and I had seen color, and there was when I was young, I could see it in any of the bright objects like the lagoon or like the swan or any of those. I would see color in those quite evidently. Now it's only in Orion and maybe a couple other targets, but yeah, it's kind of funny. It's kind of funny like that.
Yeah, I don't see a ton of color. Like seeing green in the Orion Nebula was definitely a thing for me with some of the larger aperture reflectors that I had,
Yeah,
and a little bit in like kind of in the Sagittarius area there.
yeah,
But beyond that, mostly gray. And now with the smaller refractors, it's mostly gray to me too.
yeah. Yeah, it's even in like my 4 inch, I still once I get below 4 inch now, I don't see the color as much in Orion. But I remember when I was in my late 20s going to a really like an absolute Bordeaux one perfect sky and seeing gold in the star clouds of Sagittarius. And
Hmm.
that really sticking out to me, just like you do in a long exposure photograph. I saw the gold in those clouds, and I remember going home that night, and yeah, I had never even heard of anybody seeing that before, and tried to look it up on the internet and stuff, and couldn't find anybody who had. But yeah, I definitely saw gold in those Sagittarius star clouds, so that was pretty wild.
Hmm.
But I mean, you can see color in these things. Like everybody's eyes are different. And one of my eyes sees red better, and one of my eyes sees green better. So I can kind of switch back and forth too, and that's kind of a weird experience. So anyway. All right, with that, Shane, anything else to add to the show?
That's all, Chris.
All right. Please share the show with other stargazers you know. Send us your show ideas, observations, and questions to actualastronomy@gmail.com.
Thank you, everyone, for listening, and we hope you enjoyed the show. If you are interested in more information, would like to contact us, or if you would like to support the podcast, check out our website, actualastronomy.com.